Shakespeare's Venetian plays Othello and The Merchant of Venice have captivated audiences for centuries. The vibrant backdrop of Venice, with its Machiavellian political landscape and cultural diversity, adds a unique dimension to these tragedies. But a compelling case can be made for the significant influence of Gasparo Contarini's The Commonwealth and Government of Venice, translated by Lewes Lewkenor. We'll examine the influence of Lewkenor on the setting of the plays, his shaping of the language used, and his unique connections to the real people cited by scholars as the model for the characters of Shylock, Othello, Portia, and Iago. As we shall see, Lewkenor is more than just a translator. His fingerprints are all over the plays. In 1790, Edmund Malone, a prominent Shakespearean scholar, recognized the many phrases used by Lewkenor and repeated in Othello, particularly the phrase officers of night. Malone said,
"I have no doubt that Shakespeare, before he wrote this play, read The Commonwealth and Government of Venice, translated from the Italian by Lewes Lewkenor and printed in quarto, 1599, a book prefixed to which we find a copy of verses by Spenser. This treatise furnished our poet with the knowledge of those officers of night whom Brabantio desires to be called to his assistance.
The captains of the officers by night do of themselves dispatch the matter, either for the imprisoning or torturing the offender, that there be not any disorder done in the darkness of the night, which always emboldeneth men ill-disposed to naughtiness, and that there be not any houses broken up, nor thieves, nor rogues lurking in corners with intent to do violence,"
which finds its way into Othello's first act.
"Get weapons, ho, and raise some special officers of night."
Lewis would return to this phrase 20 years later, when he referred to the nocturnal perambulations of the Venetian ambassador by describing him as an officer by night. And it is also interesting to note that he used the phrase again with a Venetian connection. Malone also pointed out,
"The sea bank of which Cassio speaks being the very term used by Lewkenor in his account of the Leto Maggiore of Venice."
Lewkenor says,
"There is a natural bank in the sea, high and eminent, that defendeth the town from the impious fury of the waves, which enter in through the gaps and breaches of that huge and mighty bank, which they call Leto Maggiore."
This is echoed by Cassio.
"I was the other day talking on the sea bank with certain Venetians."
Lewkenor adds another additional piece of information not found in his sources, which B.J. Sokol suggests was a contributing reason for Shakespeare to set his two plays about racial alienation in Venice.
"Above all other things, this is most strange, that this Venetian air, by a special privilege of nature, doth agree with the complexions of all such strangers as resort thither, of what nation or under what climate soever they be born."
Lewkenor uses the word weaponed, his own addition not found in the original, which also appears in Othello.
"Be not afraid, though you do see me weaponed."
Lewkenor Contarini places great emphasis on the inviolability of Venetian law and the Doge's inability to intervene, the core theme of The Merchant of Venice and the point of law Shylock uses to his advantage.
"Justice should be equally administered to all."
Antonio.
"The Duke cannot deny the course of law. For the commodity that strangers have for us in Venice, if it be denied, will much impeach the justice of the state."
Shylock challenges the very foundations of Venetian society, its laws.
"If you deny me fire upon your law, there is no force in the decrees of Venice."
To understand the connection between Lewkenor and the Venetian plays, it is essential to delve into his intriguing life. Lewkenor came from a respected Sussex family. He had attended Cambridge and studied law at the Middle Temple before his ardent Catholicism forced him into exile amongst the recusant community in the Low Countries. He served in the Spanish army as a captain under Alexander Farnese, Duke of Parma, and fought in some of the most intense siege warfare of the times, but his military career came to an abrupt end. Let's hear him in his own words.
"Since the banishment from my homeland and the confiscation of my property and whole means, I now have to my whole nation become manifestly notorious. Besides several grievous injuries, I have received lingering illnesses and the crippling of my right arm and hand."
Section 4. My education hath been in the wars. Banished from his homeland by 1582, Lewkenor had joined the Spanish Catholic army in the Low Countries, fighting for the King of Spain against the Protestant Dutch. Lewis served under Baptista del Monte, whose forces comprised professional soldiers said to be the most efficient military force in Europe. The Duke of Parma laid siege to the town of Oudenarde in June 1582, and it is at this point that Lewis joined the regiment. He describes the events.
1,200 horsemen of the Kingdom of Naples and 1,600 out of Lombardy with 10,000 footmen are marching downwards towards this service. The leaders are Prospero Colonna, Baptista del Monte and others.
Lewkenor's personal connection to John Baptista del Monte, a prominent Italian general in the Spanish forces who served under the Duke of Parma, is certainly interesting. He holds the same job as Othello. Lewkenor said of him,
Always do Venetians entertain in honourable sort with great provision a captain general, who always is a stranger born. He that now enjoyeth that place is one Baptista del Monte, a Florentine born, a notable soldier, one under whom I have served in the wars, and I am in all thankfulness to acknowledge many favours that I received both from him and his brother Camillo del Monte.
Lewkenor's service under Baptista del Monte adds to a compelling picture that revolves around Lewes Lewkenor. A soldier familiar to Lewkenor, one Roland Yorke, has been singled out as the blueprint for Iago by a number of scholars, most notably A. Bronson Feldman.
The Iago of this tragedy, in my opinion, was not a nobleman but a commoner, a soldier of fortune, young, clever, resourceful and treacherous, just like Othello's ensign. The real Iago, I think, was a scoundrel named Roland Yorke.
The renowned Shakespearean scholar J. Thomas Loney considered Roland Yorke to be the real-life Iago to the Earl of Oxford. But Yorke also had devious dealings with the Earl of Leicester, Sir William Stanley, and the Spaniard Francisco Verdugo, making him one of the period's most fascinating characters. Lewkenor tells us,
For Yorke, in the meantime, having discovered Verdugo's humour, fell secretly to practice with him a mean whereby to thrust Sir William and his companies out of the town. You must imagine that it grieved him to the very gall, but forced he was to dissemble it with his best patience.
Lewkenor's translation of the Commonwealth and Government of Venice provided English readers with an unprecedented glimpse into the inner workings of this powerful and enigmatic city-state. Lewis was well received at court by the Queen and found patronage from one of her closest friends, Anne Dudley, Countess of Warwick. He claimed his translation was
Written at idle times when I had nothing else to do, being at much more leisure than willingly I would be. Your ladyship, knowing my unfitness for such a work, did nevertheless impose this task upon me.
Patronage from such a respected lady is the key to Lewis's writing career, as he claims that much of the work was the Countess's own, which places Lewis in a unique position of collaborating with the Queen's best friend.
Accept therefore, good madam, with your wonted favour this poor translation, the greatest part of whose best substance is your own, as lively, though under the shadow of other names, representing the innated virtues of your own noble mind.
Anne was one of the close coterie that surrounded the Queen, a group of confidants more influential than the Privy Council, and the Countess of Warwick and her sister Margaret were the type of women who Shakespeare drew on for inspiration.
The two countesses belonged to the generation that was quickly passing away. Few were left like Lady Warwick, who belonged to the old school, the truest, wisest, greatest era of womanhood. They would never be wholly forgotten, for from them Shakespeare drew inspiration for his heroines, the immortal Portia, Beatrice, Rosalind, Juliet, Ophelia, Viola, Perdita, Desdemona, Imogen, and Cordelia.
As a model for the legal-minded Portia, Anne Russell had unique credentials. Stella Florio has pointed out the Countess' legal skills.
The Countess was to be reckoned with. She proved a formidable adversary in the matter of the Berkeley heritage, winning the estate under dispute after interminable lawsuits in a battle of injunctions, orders and affidavits, countered with indictments and Star Chamber actions. The Countess proved smarter than her adversary. In short, what she would, she could.
Lewis asked the Countess to be kind to his poor translation and offered to deliver better work, the uttermost strain of my invention.
I beseech you not to measure my duty towards you by this means. For this I know to be ordinary and vulgar, and so far from the satisfaction of mine own mind, as that I am in a manner therewith displeased. But if ever your commandment, opportunity of time and occasion, or the uttermost strain of my invention and endeavour give me leave, shall discover itself in a better proportion. I owe you many other duties, as well in regard of your many honourable favours, and continual readiness to do me good in court, since my first coming to Her Majesty's service.
Lewes also mentions the favours received from the Earls of Warwick and Leicester,
as also of the infinite obligations which not only I, but also my father and sundry of my friends do owe unto the memory of your noble deceased husband and his most worthy and ever memorable brother.
But Lewes felt the need to defend his translation.
But methinks I hear it upbraided unto me that it is now rather a time to do than to write. I confess it to be so for him that is well set on work, and yet he that writeth well is never the farther off from doing well, so that for my part I hold it no disgrace to write so long as my pen uttereth no dishonesty. My education hath been in the wars. This I only do to beguile time, wishing that whosoever shall herein censure me amiss would be as ready as myself, both in mind and body, when either commandment of my prince or occasion of my country shall enjoin me to other courses.
Several scholars have delved into the specific connections between Lewkenor's translation and both The Merchant of Venice and Othello. They have failed to cast an eye at Lewkenor's biography, where details unique to the construction of the plays can be found in great number. While an influence on Shakespeare's Othello is to be expected, as the book predated the play by 4 years, any influence on the earlier Venetian play The Merchant of Venice would require the author to have had access to Lewkenor's manuscript. Section 6, Shylock. The Oxford Shakespeare's version of The Merchant of Venice constantly refers any reference to tribe back to Lewkenor's translation. Stella Florio points out that Lewkenor and Shakespeare misused the term.
Thus, the issue has come full circle, from Contarini to Lewkenor and on to Shakespeare, then back to Lewkenor and now hopefully to Contarini, who never meant tribus in this sense.
In the Rialto you have rated me about my moneys and my usances. Still have I borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe.
This circle can be simplified if Lewkenor was both the translator and the playwright. The Folger Library holds a copy of Lewkenor's treatise, The Estate of English Fugitives, with a fascinating penciled note on the front which mentions a character within the text described as the original of Shylock.
A rich and wealthy merchant of Antwerp coming to the Jesuits in confession and telling them of some unjust gain with which he felt his conscience touched, they presently, with sundry terrifying speeches, told him that he was in the state of damnation, that he had by usury unlawfully gotten. They put the poor man into such a fear of conscience that he yielded to make restitution, whereupon to comfort him again they told him that if instead of all such interests and usuries with which he felt his conscience burthened, he should make restitution to whom it appertained, and had been by his usury interest. Whereupon the merchant, being well satisfied in conscience, gave them the money, and they him their absolution.
The word intentive, used by Othello, also appears in Lewkenor's translation. And as Kenneth Muir noted, Shakespeare uses the derivative intentively only in Othello, as is the word signore, used by Lewkenor Contarini as a synonym for Venetian government. Lewkenor tells how the Doge marries himself to the sea once a year with a gold ring, which reminds us of Portia and her lost ring.
He should yearly with such a ring spouse the sea in token of a true and perpetual dominion over the same.
And the judge's practice of making decisions using 3 pots illuminates Portia's choice to test her suitors with 3 caskets, although this plot line wasn't original.
Then the judges go unto their suffrages, for by suffrages among the Venetians all things are determined. 3 pots are brought forth, by the one of which the offender is condemned, by the other he is absolved in manner without any correction, and by the third are known the opinion of those which do seem yet to doubt whether course is to be taken. The first of condemnation is white, the second of absolution is green, the third of doubtfulness is red.
Professor Graham Holderness says,
The plays evince a breadth of understanding and a depth of immersion in what Lewkenor called the particularities of the place that has prompted some scholars to argue for a direct Shakespearean acquaintance.
Othello's ensign Iago complains that he has constantly been overlooked, failing to gain the advancement he felt he deserved in favour of Cassio. But this motive is not found in the original. Iago.
Why, there's no remedy, 'tis the curse of service. Preferment goes by letter and affection, and not by old gradation, where each second stood heir to the first.
Lewkenor had written at length in the estate of English fugitives about the poor treatment of the soldiers who had served on both sides. Lewkenor tells us of his plight as a captain.
Abandoning and utterly rejecting the merit of my long service, and such hopes and preferments, the which I might as well as any man else of my quality of my nation have pretended.
The Oxford Shakespeare edition of Othello places some significance on Lewkenor's influence.
The theme of service is among Shakespeare's more conspicuous additions to the material he found in Hecatomethi. Its appearance in the play was almost certainly mediated by a passage in Lewes Lewkenor's translation. There the dramatist would have read how certain
Foreign men and strangers were adopted into the number of citizens, either in regard of their great nobility, or that they had been dutiful towards the state, or else had done unto them some notable service.
In the last act of the play, as Lodovico places Othello under arrest, the Moor protests,
I've done the state some service, and they note.
Section 7, Lewkenor and the Moroccan ambassador. Court gossip relates the scene as the Moroccan meets Queen Elizabeth in 1599. Lewkenor acts as translator.
The ambassador of Barbary had audience upon Wednesday last. Here was a royal preparation with the manner of his receiving, rich hangings and furniture sent for from Hampton Court. The guard was very strong in their rich coats, the pensioners with their axes, the lords of the order with their collars, a full court of lords and ladies. He passed through a guard of halberds to the council chamber where he rested. He was brought to the presence, so to the privy chamber, and so to the gallery, where Her Majesty sat at the further end in very great state, and gave him audience. Mr. Lewkenor was interpreter for the Spanish tongue. But here they departed. The interpreter of the embassy spoke in Italian, and desired to deliver something in private, which Her Majesty granted, on which Mr. Lewkenor and the lords removed further off.
We see here that it is Lewkenor who is present at the meeting between the Barbary ambassador and the Queen, the most significant example of a group of Muslims visiting England. It is from this visit that the inspiration for Othello appears to have sprung. Section 8, Muir's case, strengthening the Lewkenor-Shakespeare link. Shakespearean scholar Kenneth Muir, in his seminal work, The Sources of Shakespeare's Plays, presents a compelling argument for Lewes Lewkenor's influence. The British Library website describes his findings.
Kenneth Muir has argued that Shakespeare must have consulted Lewkenor's book when he was writing Othello. Muir highlights Lewkenor's pleasure in hearing travellers' tales of painful inconveniences. He sees parallels in the way Desdemona listens with a greedy ear to the painful story of Othello's life.
Andrew Hadfield highlighted Lewkenor's letter to the reader, which opens with words that seem to predict Othello's wooing of Desdemona through his travellers' tales. Lewkenor says,
Subjecting sundry times mine ears to the report of rare and unusual accidents with a greater bent of attention than perchance to a well-tempered staidness will seem convenient, especially if they come from the mouth of a wise and well-speaking traveller, to whose tongue I could willingly endure to have mine ears inclined, while he distilleth into them the sweet liquors that he hath industriously extracted out of the painful fruits of his foreign travel.
The undercurrent of impending war in Othello is present in Lewkenor's translation, but not found in the original story by Cinthio. But another Shakespeare scholar, T. Sipahigil, argued that Malone and Muir had overlooked a key element of the play, which was drawn from Lewkenor.
It is common knowledge that in making a play out of Cinthio's novella, Shakespeare, among other things, transformed the circumstances under which Othello leaves Venice. Instead of a routine change of troops maintained by Venice in Cyprus, involving a captain and the soldiers leaving in a single ship. We have in Othello the urgent commissioning of a general who departs with an undisclosed number of ships for an imminent naval engagement. Primary as they are, Shakespeare's artistic reasons for these changes aside, it may be argued that Lewkenor's book suggested that background of urgency so obviously absent from the novella.
In 1599, Lewkenor was made one of Elizabeth's honourable band of gentlemen pensioners, an elite bodyguard formed under Henry VIII. This advancement was surely due to his writing and facility with languages. Section 9. Unmasking Shakespeare's Venice, the legacy of Lewkenor's influence. In Notes and Queries for April 1964, Christopher Whitfield examined Lewkenor's connections to Shakespeare and his Venetian plays. Lewkenor Contarini's use of the phrase "double as the Duke's" appears in Act 1, Scene 2, when Iago says,
"And hath in his effect a voice potential as double as the Duke's."
In his final paragraph, Whitfield allowed himself to dream.
It is not claimed that all that has been quoted from The Merchant of Venice is an accurate version of Lewkenor's statements, or even of Venetian law. But Shakespeare was writing a play to entertain the public, among whom were many lawyers and law students. He needed knowledge to give his play verisimilitude, and somewhere he found what he wanted. Here it is merely suggested that he obtained at least some of his knowledge from Lewkenor, particularly that relating to the Doge vis-à-vis the law, and that he obtained it either from Lewkenor's manuscript or from his conversation, or both. Beyond this, we cannot go without letting fantasy lead us, but are we not perhaps justified in doing so in this case? Is not this something more than fantasy? What think you on't? It is no ghost that we pursue, only ghosts of facts hidden in the shifting fog of time, which has perhaps parted for us for a moment as we peer into the past.
Mr. Whitfield probed a little further, exploring the connection between Lewes Lewkenor, Thomas Combe, and William Shakespeare.
At first sight, there would appear to be no likelihood of any link between Lewkenor and Shakespeare, but this is not entirely true. William Combe the Elder, the son of John Combe of Stratford and Shakespeare's friend and legator, was not only a fellow member of the Middle Temple, but was Lewkenor's cousin as well.
There are in fact many ways Lewkenor and Shakespeare would have been known to each other. Both men had dealings with Francis Langley, owner of the Swan Theatre. Both were in attendance at plays performed at court, and from 1595 both Lewkenor and the Queen's Nen are paid from the same account by the Lord Chamberlain. Section 10. Could Lewkenor have been the true author of Othello and The Merchant of Venice? Lewkenor's impact on the works of Shakespeare. This exploration of Lewkenor's influence on Shakespeare extends beyond simply identifying a source. It opens up a window into the intricate web of literary and courtly connections and inspirations that have shaped some of the most iconic works in English literature. From 1597 onwards, we find Lewkenor styling himself Lodovico on official documents, and on the document confirming him as James I's Master of the Ceremonies for Life in 1605. Lodovico is coincidentally the name given to the character who brings the play to its conclusion, telling the audience that everything they have heard and seen has come to them through the report he will give to the state. From everything we have learned about Lewes Lewkenor, we may suspect that the character of Lodovico is him. The last words of the play fall to Lodovico.
Myself will straight aboard, and to the state this heavy act with heavy heart relate.
The loss of his right arm would explain the Droshout engraving in the first folio, which represents the front and back of one left sleeve. The inclusion of verses by Leonard Digges and James Mabb also tie in with Lewkenor's Hispanomania, as both men had spent time in Madrid with Don Diego Sarmiento, Conde de Gondomar, whom Lewkenor escorted during his English embassies. Gondomar was the only known foreign subscriber to the first folio. The biographical detail we have examined around Lewes Lewkenor, when added to his acknowledged influence on the Venetian setting of the plays, has passed almost unnoticed by Shakespearean scholars. We have seen how the themes of service, impending war, and Venetian justice were all drawn from Lewkenor, and examined specific words and phrases common to both works. Let's recap the characters Lewkenor has been associated with by various Shakespeare scholars.
Othello.
Lewkenor served under Baptista del Monte, Captain General of Venice, and he escorts the Barbary ambassador, the real-life Moor, who inspired the writing of Othello.
Portia. Lewkenor received patronage from Anne Russell, the model for Portia. Iago.
Lewkenor provides first-hand reports on Roland York's dissembling, who has been connected to Iago by Shakespearean scholars.
Shylock.
And we have heard Lewes Lewkenor's tale of a usurious merchant described as the original of Shylock. Lewkenor's preoccupation with translating and compiling the great work of the Elizabethan age on Venice places him at the very heart of the interest in all things Venetian that had such an influence on the stage. His clear influence on Othello strongly suggests that Lewkenor, rather than Shakespeare, was the driving force behind the play, combining as it does elements of his past, his current employment, and his own personal passion project on Venice. It is Lodovico who relates the whole sorry story of Othello to the world, and it was under the name Lodovico that Lewes Lewkenor rose to be the master of the ceremonies to King James I. The case for Lewkenor as the author requires a complete understanding of his life, the themes he was concerned with at the time, and the ambassadors he escorted. Please continue to watch further videos where we will see how he is conclusively unmasked by his contemporaries who called him Le Bio. For further information, please see The Master of the Ceremonies by William Corbett, available from Amazon.